there was an incident out of Washington, D.C. this week that I just had to share with you. Because you know what? I think it shows so much about how the left really works. Now, to set this up, first, cast your mind back to 2017, the early days of the Trump administration, when the then president got into a fight with reporters, what else is new, over the Maoist attempts of the left to erase American history.
George Washington was a slave owner. Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down, excuse me, are we going to take down statues to George Washington?
Well, of course, we would never do anything like that. Never. No. Because at the time, so-called expert historians said that Trump was just being his normal hyperbolic self and that there was absolutely, positively no way Revolutionary General and first President of the United States, George Washington, or any of the other founding fathers, for that matter, might be next on the cancel train. Well, surprise, not only is George Washington next, but there is now even a push on to rename even Washington, D.C.'s George Washington University, and the latest call for this has just been published in, wait for it, the Washington Post.
What?
Yeah, I know.
What?
Which I suppose must be on the hunt for a new name for itself. May I suggest Pravda on the Potomac?
Ooh.
Anywho, the editorial by a student at George Washington, boo hiss, named Caleb Francois, is full of the usual word salad of critical race theory and complaints about systemic racism and white supremacy at the university. You know, the usual stuff we hear about every time we do a Wackademia segment on this show. Oh, and by the way, these liberal arts schools, who knew where all of these complaints keep cropping up? Who knew they were home to so many racist KKK claverns? But back to the editorial in the George Washington was a racist slave owner Post. In properly Maoist fashion, young Mr. Francois calls for not only Washington's name to be expunged, but those of many other heroes as well. Francois writes, the racist visions of James Madison, Winston Churchill, and others are glorified through building names, programs, statues, and libraries that honor their memory. The controversial Winston Churchill Library must go. The university's contentious colonial moniker must go. Even the university's name, mascot, and motto, Hail Thee George Washington, Francois writes, must be replaced. Now, the hypocrisy of George Washington in not addressing these issues, he says, is an example of how black voices and black grievances go ignored, and it highlights the importance of strong black leadership. Right. Well, look, a lot of this idiocy speaks for itself, and it's not worth wasting our time defending the naming of a library after Winston Churchill. But it is worth noting that this is what happens time and time again. It's known as the salami strategy, whereby the left starts out with what sounds like a perfectly reasonable demand, oh no, we just don't want to honor slave owners, and gets people who are just trying to be nice to agree with it. And then, inch by inch, slice by slice, they demand more and more. Now, one of the big reasons why Trump was hated so much was because he was onto this, and he called it out, and his prediction about what would happen to George Washington and the efforts of the haters to expunge him from history has, of course, come perfectly true. This is why what are often derided as petty culture war fights are actually so important and worth being had, because it's not just important to look at whatever the demand being made around the current thing is in isolation, but to understand where it is heading next.